History can get pretty weird, and one way of exploring that weirdness is through the jobs people did through the ages. You won't believe some of the things that folks got paid to do, from shoveling dung to taking other people's punishments. We're hiring you to watch this video and tell us what you think. I'm Mike with this25, and here are 25 weirdest jobs in history people actually had. 25. The Grand Témoin. This job turns the French language into a sport. Sacre bleu! How does that work? The Grand Témoin, translating as the Great Witness, is part of the Olympic Games. What are they witnessing? Well, the Grand Témoin keeps a close watch on the games, making sure French is prominently used. They're actually employed by the OIF, the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie, basically an international company which promotes French speaking. From signs to ceremonies, this person is on top of all things France-related. Why do they do this? Because of the historic connection between the Olympics and France. The Olympic Games, as we know them today, was the idea of Pierre de Coubertin, an educator who co-founded the International Olympic Committee. The Grand Témoin has been a thing since 2004, and the role is still going today. 24. 50 Cent Party. No, this isn't a gig arranging parties for fans of the rapper 50 Cent. Instead, it's a shadowy role connected to the Chinese government. These individuals are paid to log in and cause disruption online. They might start posting communist propaganda on a chat forum or find other ways to amplify the People's Republic. This job has been around for a quarter of a century or so and is the authorities' way of spreading their message in the online space. So the next time you see a suspiciously pro-China message on social media, it's possibly a member of the 50 Cent Party. Why are they called that? It comes from the tiny amount they were reportedly paid, though that story isn't confirmed. 23. Pro-laughers. If you've ever delivered a speech and the audience is laughing its head off, it's for one of two reasons. Either you wrote a bunch of zingers, or someone hired professional laughers to ramp up the comedy factor. The heyday of these paid chucklers was in 19th century French theater. Pros sat in the crowd and tickled their funny bones together with professional cheerers and applauders. They were part of a company called Clack or Slap, hired by venues to help guarantee a great night out. It was dishonest, but hey, that's show business. 22. Mafeking Cadet Corps. There wouldn't be a scout movement without the Mafeking Cadet Corps. These brave young people served in the Second Boer War at the end of the 19th century. Specifically, they worked as messengers, where they rode their bikes through combat zones. The Corps also performed other duties, such as delivering supplies and being a lookout. They had an average age of 13 or 14, and the man who organized them was British Colonel Robert Baden-Powell. When the war ended in 1902, he went on to found the British Boy Scout movement, inspired by his time in South Africa. That in turn led to the creation of an American movement called the Boy Scouts of America, later renamed Scouting America. 21. Headstone Marker Department. When a U.S. veteran passes away, there's someone whose job it is to provide official identification markings for their grave. They're part of a team working for the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, supplying medallions, other markers, and even entire headstones to various locations, ensuring the person who died is well remembered. The organization dates back to the 19th century and the Civil War era. There's no charge for the headstones, though families may have to pay for installation, plus the individual concerned has to meet certain criteria. All in all, however, it's a welcome service from the government, which offers recognition and dignity for those who put their lives at risk for their country. 20. Ear cleaners. Did you know you can get your ears cleaned in public? Go to India and you may see a kansafewala, which is a professional who uses cotton, tweezers, oil, and other things to get rid of that problem wax and make you feel like you got a brand new set of ears. It isn't the most glamorous job in the world, and it's been around since ancient times. In some cases, it's a family business, with the important yet icky trade being passed down through the generations. Guess it beats jamming a cotton bud in there, something that used to be popular, but not so much now. You can do a lot of accidental damage that way. 19. Kilo Girls. Before there were computers in the workplace, there were the Kilo Girls. These largely female employees were human calculators who performed important jobs at institutions such as NASA and Harvard. You'd see them doing stuff like arithmetic, calculating trajectories and astronomical data, plus engineering tasks. True multitaskers of the non-digital age. The name originated from their male colleagues, with the description "kilo girl hours" comparable to machine hours. Pretty patronizing stuff, but there was different times back then. They were popular in the 19th and 20th centuries, though references to them go back even further. By the 60s, they'd been replaced by monitors, keyboards, and hard drives. 18. Pin boys. One surprisingly dangerous job from back in history was pin boy. Whenever you go bowling, you probably take that automated pin setter for granted. Things weren't always done this way. Pre-1930s, the role was taken by a human, namely a boy or a teen who got paid for repositioning the pins and sending the ball back to the players. It needed a sense of timing and alertness, otherwise you might find yourself getting knocked over by a heavy bowling ball. Like waiting staff, they reportedly received tips that were thrown to them down the gutters. They were battered and bruised, plus they received abuse from angry players. However, if you think modern bowling is much safer, you'd be wrong. There are gruesome stories of people who've been inadvertently crushed by automatic pin setters. 17. Leech Collector. Some people collect trading cards or Funko Pops. Others collect leeches? I'm being flippant, but the job of leech collector was no laughing matter. I mean, can you believe people used to earn money encouraging leeches to attach themselves to their bodies? This was no role for the squeamish, but there was a worthy cause behind it. Medical science in the old days relied on some surprising treatment methods. Among them, using leeches to suck infected blood out of sick patients. Poor workers in rural areas needed to take a dip in rivers and ponds to attract the popular creepy crawlies. They suffered from sores, infections, and even became anemic through doing this job. As for the leeches, well, they're still applied by doctors in certain cases today. 16. River pigs. Think you have a demanding job? But you clearly haven't ever heard of the river pigs. A colorful name given to those crazy individuals who are more popularly known as log drivers. The aim of a log driver was to transport logs down rivers so they could be used by businesses. Trucks and trains weren't around at the time, meaning sheer manpower was needed. As you can imagine, the logs were super heavy and made a dangerous mix with the strong water currents. I mean, these guys traveled by boat, right? No, they didn't. In fact, they traveled on the logs themselves with spiked boots keeping them in position as they rolled them around. This was incredibly hazardous, and sadly, drowning was a fact of life for the so-called river pigs. People were still doing this job in the 70s. 15. Fullers. Here's a weird job that's guaranteed to amaze you. Back in the days of the Roman Empire, fullers, or cleaners, used a surprising ingredient to make people's clothes fresh and clean. That ingredient was ammonia, which also doubled as a whitening agent. Where could a fuller find a limitless supply of ammonia? It was readily available in toilets everywhere. Yep, I'm talking about urine. The dirty clothes would go into a tub of urine and water, then so would the fuller. They had to put their feet in the disgusting liquid, really getting their toes around those togas. Despite being splashed with pee all day, fullers were part of the thriving economy. The bladder emptying business was booming, so much so that Emperor Vespasian created the urine tax so he could get a piece of the action. If there was ever a job where you needed to think of the money, this was it. 14. Whipping boy. The expression whipping boy is a historical term that's still used in the 21st century, but it was also an actual job. Between the 15th and 17th centuries, young men were hired to take punishments intended for royal princes. Yeah, when a prince misbehaved in the classroom, they were immune from being beaten thanks to their lofty status. Someone had to be punished, and that unfortunate person was the whipping boy. The role was most popular in Europe, where boys of the same age were plucked from high society and given the honor of having their hides tanned because their friend did something wrong. Bizarrely, the whipping boy was meant to make the prince feel guilty and learn from the experience, so they in turn would modify their behavior. Not sure that worked in all cases. If anything, it's a license to run riot with no consequence. 13. Nomenclators. Do you have difficulty remembering people's name and personal details? It's always awkward when you run into someone you know and your mind goes blank. Oh, hey, it's you. Ugh. That situation was remedied in ancient Rome thanks to a helpful assistant called a nomenclator. Translating as name caller, the nomenclator would give their master a heads up when anyone familiar was approaching. They discreetly provided a name and other relevant information, helping high-status individuals to appear knowledgeable and considerate. The amount of data the nomenclator had in their heads was incredible, so they had to be super observant to stay in the game. 12. Vestal Virgins. The Roman goddess Vesta was a virgin symbol representing home and family. In a temple in Rome lay a sacred flame burning in her honor, which was protected by a sisterhood called the Vestal Virgins. They were prepared for this long-term job from childhood, where they'd be trained to serve the flame for the next 30 years. The training section alone took a decade. It was an exclusive role, with the Guardians of Vesta's Flame numbering just 6 at any one time. If they failed in their duty and the flame went out, the whole city was believed to be in danger. Like the goddess they got their name from, the Vestals were virgins, and they were expected to stay that way throughout their servitude. They did have perks to go with the job, though, such as permission to own property. That was a major deal for women back then. 11. White Monkey. The name of this job can be seen as controversial in modern times. Nevertheless, the role of White Monkey is something that's still advertised in the 21st century. It comes from the skin color of the person who's been hired. You see, employers in China and East Asia like to promote a certain image to appeal to the overseas markets and beyond. They look for Caucasian people who appear to be used for purely aesthetic reasons. White monkeys could do something as simple as pose for a photo shoot, or they might even be asked to play pretend. That white company executive you're meeting might not work for the firm at all. It's more than just monkey work in some cases, with a pay rate to match. 10. Lector. Starting in the mid-19th century, Cuban cigar factory workers had their own version of the workplace radio. This was the Lector, who looked down on them from a platform, a little like a tennis umpire. They weren't in a position of authority, though. They were providing the entertainment. Lectors made the day go quicker by reading to the busy cigar rollers. Sometimes they read stories from the newspaper or performed as a living audiobook with various novels. Other times, things got serious. It wasn't unusual to hear a lector fill the workers in on political ideas. Whatever the content, the lector urged people in the factory to use their brains as well as their hands. They were popular members of the team, and you can see why. 9. Monkey magic. How do you handle a monkey invasion? That's the situation officials in the New Delhi Parliament faced in 2014 when a pack of macaques landed on their premises. They weren't there to talk to politicians, they'd rocked up to cause chaos. One solution was to bring in langurs, rival monkeys who could clear out the invaders. However, this wasn't the most humane way of dealing with the problem, so authorities had to change tactics. Enter the monkey impersonators. These special government employees had to walk around Parliament making animal sounds to convince the macaques they had competition. There were 40 of these mimics, reflecting the scale of the problem. A similar situation occurred later in 2023 during the G20 summit. That time, cutouts of langur monkeys were used to frighten the creatures away. 8. Radium Girls. This weird job had a terrible, horrible outcome for the women involved. So-called Radium Girls were employed to make luminous watches for the Radium Corporation in the early 20th century. Luminosity came from paint, which contained the element radium. Because the element was radioactive, the impact on workers was devastating. Not only did they handle radioactive paint, they got it in their mouths through shaping the brushes with their lips. Little did they know they were swallowing highly dangerous material. Over time, the Radium Girls developed radiation poisoning as well as bone necrosis or bone tissue death. This also resulted in a degenerative condition called radium jaw. Dozens of the women died, and major lawsuits were launched against the Radium Corporation. The victims got justice, though the legal side lasted years, too long for some of them to witness the outcome. 7. Groom of the Stool. Being a groom at the Stool was a messy business. By that, I mean literally. And I'm not talking about the kind of stool you use to sit on. The role was focused all on things royal and toilet related. Because one famous employer of the Stool groom was historical food lover Henry VIII, that could be quite a task. Your job would be to look after the king as he did his business. Yes, you'd be on the scene in all kinds of situations which weren't confined to the royal bathroom. There was even a portable toilet called the close tool, which was on hand in case His Majesty needed to go potty. This job is so grim, it's hard to see what the upside was. Fortunately, there were advantages to being a regal toilet attendant. There were few people closer to the ruler of England, meaning you had access to classified information and anything else your master might care to reveal as he's emptying his bowels. 6. Gong Farmer. The name Gong Farmer creates weird images in the mind. Was this a guy in a field who was banging a gong when it was time for workers to have lunch? Nope. Think less scenic. Think manure. Though this job involved more feces than anyone could handle. You see, in medieval times, gong didn't mean a metal disc you whacked with a mallet. It referred to poop, which was everywhere back then. Farmers would travel to the toilets of various castles where they were lowered into a stinking pit of defecation. Why the heck were they doing that? They collected it so it could be used as fertilizer. And it gets worse when you find out how they gathered it up. Some of them used shovels, but others got more hands-on, if you know what I mean. On top of having a terrible job, gong farmers were treated as social outcasts. They also worked at night where their foul deeds couldn't be seen by the public. Eventually, they realized they were getting too old for this shit. 5. Super Recognizers. Do you have a memory for faces? Maybe you're good enough to be a super recognizer. These individuals are often employed by police, where they provide a vital service identifying wrongdoers. The crazy thing is, you'd think they'd be replaced by facial recognition software, but they haven't been. In fact, the idea of a super recognizer is a relatively recent development. The name was invented in 2009, and the role only became an official part of police business in 2015 through London's Metropolitan Force. It only takes a second or two for someone's features to become embedded in a recognizer's brain. That's what makes them so useful. And this is a great example of human ingenuity surviving against the backdrop of advanced technology. 4. Devil's Advocate. This is another one of those things you may know as an expression, but which started out as an actual job. Devil's Advocate was a duty performed in the Catholic Church where they worked as part of the canonization process. In case you don't know, this is where someone is recommended for sainthood. The advocate, also called the promoter of the faith, is there to argue against the person being proposed as a saint. He also questions the nominee, much like a prosecutor would do in court. Arguing with the devil's advocate is God's advocate, though it isn't exactly a battle. They're working towards the same goal. Basically, the devil's advocate is a holy interrogator who's checking everything is good to go for the Lord Almighty. You don't see them anymore, but they were around for centuries, employed between 1587 and 1983. 3. Funeral mute. Victorian funerals had lots of people standing quietly in black. They were all paying their respects, but only a few of them were paid to be there. Funeral mutes dressed the part, though they didn't have a connection to the deceased. For them, this was a work thing, and it sounds like a fairly easy way to make money. That said, the idea behind the role was to symbolize grief, which must get pretty exhausting after a while. It wasn't just the Victorians who employed funeral mutes. Records of them go back as far as the 1600s, and they were the perfect thing to have for an appropriately mournful atmosphere. 2. Donkey puncher. This job is not as cruel as it sounds. In fact, it was more cruel to human beings than to animals. The donkey here isn't a four-legged friend, but a steam-powered machine used for logging and mining. Popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the so-called steam donkey was a heavy-duty winch. One man was in control of this beast, the donkey puncher. I don't know how much punching he actually did, but he probably would have hurt his hand if he tried. It was really all about making sure the machine didn't injure or kill anyone. One snapped cable could have spelled disaster for the work crew. This was a lot of responsibility for a man and his donkey. 1. Town Crier. Town Crier is quite a famous job, and it's not such a weird occupation to have. Or is it? Back in history, the town of Goslar in Germany brewed beer. What has that got to do with the town crier, you may ask? Without the crier, the beer might have given a lot of customers food poisoning. They obtained the water for the booze from the local river, and it was important people knew not to go to the toilet there. Who better than a town crier to shout out the message loud and clear, your defecation is not welcome here. Goslar wasn't alone in using nearby water sources to produce beer, so maybe that cry was heard in towns across Europe. You know what? That's enough for me. I quit. Which of these jobs would you have wanted? Let us know in the comments. And if you're looking for more strange stories about jobs you never knew existed, well, I've got the perfect video for you right here. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, comment, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you soon for the next list. What's the weirdest job you've ever had? Let me know.